when I think about risk, I was thinking about insurance.
Mhm.
And not everyone likes to think about insurance. Now, obviously, we have to have auto insurance, to drive. We have to have renters or homeowners insurance for where we live. But there's a lot of other insurance that I feel are very, very valuable in
Mhm.
planning, and sometimes even get a black eye because of bad experiences or the bad actors out there in the world that do that. So talk to me a little bit about insurance and how you see it and recommend it and utilize it in your day-to-day for advisors and investors.
Yeah. So, the purpose of insurance is really to offset risk, some portion. It could be some portion or all of that risk, right? So, first thing to do is you want to identify what that risk is. And so, for example, life insurance, that's an easy one. Everybody's familiar with life insurance. If I were to die, what would happen? What is it that I would want for my family if I were not around? Would I want the mortgage paid off? Would I want my kids' education funded? Would I want my spouse to have to go back to work? And then if so, do we need to get childcare? So kind of looking through that. And so let's say, okay, you've figured out what your objectives are if the worst case scenario were to happen and I were to die tomorrow. Do I already have the resources to support those goals? And, when you're younger, you usually don't. You don't have the resources to do all of that. And that's where insurance comes in. And there's a lot of, term insurance has gotten really inexpensive right now. I think probably $1 million, 15-year term policy for a healthy 50-year-old runs, I don't know, $100 a month, $1,200 a year. So you can get it really cheap. And then as you age and you continue to save and you're paying down the mortgage and your kids are getting older, your needs reduce, right? And your resources go up. So that needs to be checked. Do I still need this $1 million life insurance policy? Maybe I only need $500,000 now. So you can think about laddering some of those things. And so it sort of slowly drops off. It's just an easy way to leverage your dollars to offset some of that risk. Disability is another example. I think that's overlooked far too often. For most people, their lifetime earnings is their biggest asset of their entire financial plan. And they need those dollars to fund all of these future goals, retirement, education, all of those things. So you need to protect that earned income. But you should always check it. I mean, I'm not saying you buy this insurance and keep it forever until it runs out and that's fine. At some point, you can self-insure. And so that comes down to your own personal risk tolerance. Yes, I might be able to self-insure, but it's not that expensive. And if something were to happen, it'd be nice to have that extra cash come in. So each person's a little bit different. I would say the last one that I see that's pretty important that gets ignored goes under the property and casualty, like you were saying, the homeowners and auto. Everyone has homeowners and auto pretty much. What I don't see very often is the excess liability policies, so umbrella policies. And these are policies that will pay out for liability claims that are above and beyond. So if you get in a car accident and your car insurance covers $500,000, but you get sued for $3 million, the umbrella policy will kick in the amount over the $500,000. And again, really inexpensive, $100 to $200 for $1 million umbrella policy. And having that will allow you to reduce your underlying homeowners and auto policies to keep those premiums down. And it's really worth it, especially if you've got kids that are driving or about to start driving. You've got pets. Some dogs are considered dangerous. You serve on board. You have a pool in your backyard, and the whole neighborhood likes to come and hang out at your house. I mean, you hear the horror stories, and I don't want to fearmonger and say, oh my gosh, you're going to get sued and make that a thing, but it's something to consider, and it's pretty inexpensive risk to cover.
Yeah. The umbrellas and excess liability. It's interesting because I'm with you. It's not really a fear discussion. It's more about just how much risk do you want to have out there on the table with your assets that you've accumulated and potentially earned. And it also depends on sometimes your estate planning you've done or put in place. I know it depends on what state you live in. There's different levels of protection. And so I think that's a complicated one and good to discuss and make sure whatever someone has is in place. But even just like you said, in some ways, it's just a good tool to use to bring down your auto insurance,
Hmm.
because especially if you're in Colorado, which I think is like the second or third or fourth most expensive in the country, by balancing and coordinating coverages, you just, it's a good financial decision to use that tool to make that, adjust a little bit. So I know there's different uses for it. I think the disability and the life insurance topic, I'm with you. One thing I'll comment to add on to what you said, I think, is that we often see a couple common themes, and I'm curious what you see. With executives, you see sometimes, or folks that are part of a larger company and they have employer coverage, they just assume that's good to go and enough. But often, we know that people change jobs. We know sometimes people have an entrepreneurial bug in them and they're going to go do something in their business, and later you buy insurance on average, it gets more expensive. So that's one thing I'm curious to get your thoughts on. The second thing is around a business owner, right? You and I have started businesses and there's risk to that. And by having, I feel like for our significant others and loved ones and families, having these insurances in place kind of allow us to take more risk too, should something happen, not just investment risk, but business risk, right? So maybe talk to me about what you see in regards to some of those decisions that people do and don't do.
Yeah, no, I would agree. I mean, it's sort of like the emergency reserves too, right? If you know you're okay for 3 years, you can take more risk with your portfolio, because if it goes down, it's okay. You still have your cash sitting aside. Yeah, I think if you serve on a board, if you're an executive on a board, you better check. I mean, you could be sued even on your HOA, and so there's definitely some things to think through, of activities that you do that you might not consider being risky at all. Yeah, and again, as a business owner, that's even more important, because if you're gone, what's the value of your business worth? It may be nothing if you're not there. If you're the main person, the rainmaker running the show, and you pass away and there's nobody there to sort of step in, or you might be able to get pennies on the dollar to get somebody to take over. But so you really definitely want to look through that. If you're, again, if your financial plan is counting on something out of that business, then you need to protect it, right? Preserve. I mean, you've worked so hard to gather the assets you have right now. Why wouldn't you do what you can to preserve and protect it? It's as important as continuing to grow your assets. You want to.
Yeah, and I think some of the assumptions also have changed now that we're in a pandemic too, right? The liquidity factor, going back to that, just in simple cash, and as a business owner or part of a large company, it may not be there in a pandemic as you had previously thought. So that's a good point.
Yeah. So again, going back to the debt, access to debt as a business owner, it's really important to have good relationships and maybe have a credit line that you hardly ever use, but if you need it to pay payroll for the next 3 months to keep your people on staff and ready to come back to work when you're ready to open again, that would be really important.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point.